Dipa Ma, Part 2, Dipa Ma's Spiritual Path. Chapter 4, To the Edge and Beyond. Quote, "You can do anything you want to do." As in the example of Dipa Ma's life, the spiritual path is a journey of transformation in which the mind's cherished beliefs and self-imposed limitations are challenged at every turn. The teacher's job is to push her students beyond the boundaries of what they think is possible, to upend all notions of "I can't." For who is the I that can't, and what is can't but a construct of the mind? Dipa Ma had seen, through the development of her own powers, that there are no limits to what the mind can do. Sometimes she could be outrageous in her instructions and suggestions, at other times quietly and relentlessly persistent. She would walk her students right to the edge, and then urge them to go beyond. She also taught that, quote, going beyond could mean the simple willingness to reveal oneself, to let things unravel and come crashing down, and, from that place, to keep on going. The journey of transformation involves more, however, than the valiant effort to surpass one's limitations. It also requires us to balance our effort, our intentions, and our energy. Dipa Ma often said, quote, "If you practice for a result, then it becomes a hindrance." End quote. The desire for liberation is nonetheless desire, one of the key hindrances on the spiritual path. At one stage, zeal on the path is useful, and it moves us along. At another stage, this very thing that was so helpful becomes an impediment. We need to recognize when effort has become an obstruction. To stay with what is happening without giving up, sometimes that is all that is possible. A fierce Burmese monk, U Pandita, frequently admonished his Western students to diligently, quote, "practice without regard for body or life." However, Howard Cohn points out that Dipa Ma's stance was slightly but significantly different. Quote, "Practice without regard for body or life, and with all the love in your heart." End quote. Dipa Ma perfected a mature form of effort, one that encompasses both strength and ease, the masculine and the feminine. Practice requires more than a zealous samurai warrior attitude. It also demands that we find compassion and love within ourselves. We can come to practice, like Dipa Ma, from a place of childlike wonder that is invincible in its truth and sincerity. Stephen Smith observed that, quote, "In Dipa Ma, there was a wondrous quality about making effort. Everything was an adventure. Practicing through the middle of the night was an adventure. She embodied the realization that motivation for practice can come from the wonder of each moment." End quote. "She taught me that mindfulness isn't something to strive for," echoes Sharon Kreider. "It's always there. It's going on all the time. Rather than something I have to seize, mindfulness is just being with what is, as it arises, all the time." End quote. For many Western students, the greatest challenge can be to balance effort with ease, gentleness, and compassionate acceptance. Practice All the Time, by Bob Ray. Quote, "When Dipa Ma asked me about my practice, I told her that I meditated in the morning and in the evening every day, and the rest of the day I worked at my job. Then she inquired, 'Well, what do you do on weekends?' I don't remember my answer, but her response was, 'There are 2 days. You should be practicing all day Saturday and Sunday.' Then she gave me a strict lesson on how to optimize my time. I never forgot this lesson, this idea that I should be practicing all the time." End quote. Don't Be Lazy, by Joseph Goldstein. Quote, "The last time I saw Dipa Ma before she died, she told me that I should sit for 2 days. She didn't mean a 2-day retreat, but one sitting 2 days long. I had to laugh. It seemed completely impossible. But with uncompromising compassion, she simply said to me, 'Don't be lazy.'" End quote. What Are Our Limits? Quote by Michelle McDonald. When Dipa Ma came to Insight Meditation Society to teach a 3-month silent retreat in 1984, Joseph and Sharon were paired as a teaching team, and I was paired teaching with Dipa Ma. We would do interviews all morning, have lunch, and then Dipama would go to her house across the street, and I would go to my room to rest before teaching again in the afternoon. Just before I took my little joyful nap, I would look out my window and see Dipama outside doing walking meditation. She was sick that year, and it was very cold. It would be snowing. She would have her white cotton sari on, walking back and forth in the snow. This from an old woman with a heart condition. I would look out my window, and I'd look at Dipama, and I'd look at my bed, and I'd look at Dipama. I felt I had to accept my limits. I knew I couldn't go outside and do walking meditation at that point, but I could appreciate and see the difference. Her unfailing dedication to really finish, to be fully liberated, made her so powerful, yet that power was utterly sweet. She never stopped. That, together with noticing that her actions didn't seem to reflect being motivated by aversion or attachment, was mind-boggling. I would see all this, and then I would go take a nap. End quote. Only Thoughts Hold You Back. By Sharon Salzberg. Quote, in 1974, I stopped by Calcutta to say goodbye to Dipama. I told her, I'm going back to America for a short time to get my health together, to get some more money, and then I'll be back. She shook her head and asserted, no, when you get back to America, you'll be teaching meditation with Joseph. I said, no, I won't, and she said, yes, you will, and I said, no, I won't. Finally, she just looked me in the eye and declared, you can do anything you want to do. It's only your thought that you can't do it that's holding you back. She added, you should teach because you really understand suffering. This was a great blessing with which she sent me off back to America. That was over 30 years ago. And she was right. End quote. You Have Enough Time, by Primatomoyi Barua. Quote, if you are a householder, you have enough time, Dipama told me. Very early in the morning, you can take 2 hours for meditation. Late in the evening, you can take another 2 hours for meditation. Learn to sleep only 4 hours. There is no need for sleeping more than 4 hours. From that day on, I cut my sleeping time. I would meditate up until midnight sometimes, or get up early in the morning at 2 or 3 and meditate. Ma told us we had to stay healthy so we could continue practicing. She said observing the 5 precepts every day would keep me healthy. End quote. Do Whatever You Can. Quote by Surupti Barua. I asked Nani, Dipama, I heard you teach Vipassana. What is that? She gave me an explanation of Vipassana, then said, I was once like you, suffering very much. I believe you can proceed in a way to become free. I told her, I have so many concerns with my mother and my son, and I also must run a family and a large bakery business. It is not possible for me to do this Vipassana. Who says? When you are thinking about your son or mother, then you think about them mindfully. When you are doing your household work, know that you are doing this. As a human being, it is never possible to solve all of your problems. The things you are facing and suffering, bring mindfulness to this. But between my bakery and my family, it is impossible to find even 5 minutes for meditation. Then, you can manage just 5 minutes a day, and do that. It is important to do whatever you can, no matter how little. I know I cannot spare 5 minutes. It is impossible. Nanny asked me if I would meditate with her right then and there for 5 minutes. So I sat with her for 5 minutes. She gave me instructions in meditation, even though I said I had no time. Somehow, I found 5 minutes a day, and I followed her instructions. And from this 5 minutes, I became so inspired. I did 5 minutes a day, and then more and more. Meditation became my first priority. I wanted to meditate whenever I could. I was able to find longer and longer times to meditate. And soon I was meditating many hours a day, into the night, sometimes all night after my work was done. I found energy and time I didn't know I had. End quote. Push to the Next Level by Stephen Schwartz. Quote, almost every time I left Dipa Ma for more than a few hours, she would give me an exhortation to practice diligently. She was continually trying to push me to the next level. I hope you will remember to sit X hours, or I hope you will try to do X. Once or twice she used the words, I expect you to. She always talked in a very soft voice, so it was never too intense, but underneath there was a real determination to it. End quote. Continuous Ease by Katrina Schneider. Quote, during my 2-month retreat with Dipa Ma, her focus in our regular interviews was always on areas of my practice that needed work. For instance, what particular emotions were still strong, during what sitting or part of a sitting was concentration weak. How was I dealing with drowsiness at the end of the day? She didn't discourage enthusiasm about what was going well, but she always wanted to discuss what was inhibiting continuity in the practice. What was fascinating about Dipa Ma was that she lived with that steadiness or continuity. It didn't matter if she was having lunch, going for a walk, or dealing with her young grandson. She did it with strong attention, marked with a sense of ease. I was reminded of Dipa Ma's approach to practice when we recently had a desert turtle living in our yard as a pet. The tightly woven fence never seemed to create an obstacle for this slow and steady creature. To keep track of him, we put a Band-Aid on his shell with our phone number on it. Days after each disappearance, the phone would ring, and we would be awestruck at how far and wide we would have to drive to retrieve him. When we placed him in the backyard, the moment his feet hit the ground, he was beginning his next journey. It was like that with Dipa Ma. One could see a profound continuity and effortlessness. She taught me that grace is really economy, not too much and not too little. End quote. Are You Really Doing It? Quote by Jack Kornfield. Quote, she would always ask, how much are you sitting? How is your mindfulness? How awake are you in your life? Basically, the question was, are you really doing it, or are you just thinking about it? It's a great idea to live with mindfulness, but are you actually living your life that way? End quote. The Dharma is Everywhere by Michelle McDonald. Quote, at the end of one retreat, I told Dipa Ma how hard it was to go back to my life because I was living in a remote part of the country where there wasn't a formalized Sangha, community of practitioners. I asked her about how to manage without a Sangha, and she said, the Dharma is everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. End quote. Impeccable Effort by Joseph Goldstein. Quote, Dipa Ma's greatest gift to me was showing me what was possible and living it. She was impeccable about effort. People with this ability to make effort are not disheartened by how long it takes, how difficult it is. It takes months, it takes years, it doesn't matter, because the courage of the heart is there. She gave the sense that with right effort, anything is possible. End quote. No Excuses by Carol Wilson. Quote, Dipa Ma was no nonsense and no excuses. To say, oh, I'm too tired, or the conditions aren't right, or I have a backache, I don't want to practice today. There was no room for that. She made it clear that if you want to do it, you can do it if the commitment is there. For her, there was never a reason not to sit. She just didn't understand why we wouldn't always be practicing. Socializing was out of the question. Gossip and junk novels, no way. End quote. Mindful Dreams by Michelle Liebenson Grady. Quote, somebody asked her what her dreams were like, and she said, there is always mindfulness present in my dreams. End quote. And end of chapter 4.